Hello and welcome to Solomoriah Speaks, Episode 7, Rule 0. Rule 0 is that rule that everyone should have heard by now if you're involved in role-playing games. The game master is always right. Rule 0 is a standard feature of old school games. It is a thing that people in the new school make fun of, roundly dislike in many cases. Rule 0 is sometimes called fiat. No, not that kind of fiat. This kind of fiat. Dictionary.com gives this definition: an arbitrary decree or pronouncement, especially by a person or group of persons having an absolute authority to enforce it. Basically, the right of the game master to say the game is whatever he or she wants it to be, to determine the outcome of any situation according to his or her own preferences, ideas, impressions, whatever. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because I've lately on social media seen a number of people who've made negative comments about it, who are otherwise involved in old school games of some kind. I think this is kind of odd because fiat is such an important element in old school games. It's important to the way the game runs, it is important to the way the game is played, and it's important to maintaining a rules-light game. Now, anybody that's seen the size of some of the books in the old school, they're not as big as the new school books, but some of them are fairly big, might question rules light, but bear with me. New school games frequently limit or remove entirely the game master's fiat. The game master's job is simply to act as a referee, to mediate interaction between the NPCs or monsters that he or she is responsible for controlling, who are still required to follow all the rules of the game exactly as they're written. In their interactions with player characters who are also following the rules as they're written. Limiting the game master's fiat has a couple of effects. One of them is that the game rules have to be a lot bigger. If the game master is not allowed to judge, to decide what happens in situations the rules don't describe, then the game needs to describe every possible situation. I question whether that's even possible. In most new school games, the game master's fiat is limited to basically playing the parts of the NPCs and monsters, in some of them anyway. And even in those games that are a little more liberal, there will be rules that say things like, this is how you calculate an appropriate challenge for a group of player characters. You may not, you should not ever expose them to a challenge that's greater than this calculation. I feel like that really would impact my suspension of disbelief. How am I going to imagine myself in this world where I know in my mind that every challenge I meet I can defeat? Every one of them. Not that it's necessarily guaranteed, but still, that I can defeat every possible threat that I'm going to encounter because the world is structured that way. In the real world, you often encounter challenges you just can't defeat. So this is my problem with removing Rule 0 from the game entirely. I'm going to talk about the value of the other way around, where Rule 0 is the most important thing. Why do the new school games limit fiat? Well, the reason is pretty simple and actually fairly obvious to me, I think, because I lived through the old days. I have played RPGs under bad game masters, under game masters who really weren't very good at what they were doing, who played favorites. I definitely was exposed to a game master that played favorites, who didn't judge fairly what should be possible, what should not be possible, creating situations that I found difficult to resolve, difficult to wrap my mind around as even something that could happen, even in a fictional world. When a game master is allowed to do anything he or she wants, it is fairly easy to do stupid stuff, to do rude things, to do unpopular things, to do things that maybe are initially popular but turn out to be mistakes. to just make a lot of messes. The new school method, removing or limiting the game master's fiat and providing more rules to cover those situations the game master would ordinarily need to judge. The new school method makes it much harder to be a bad game master. I can't argue this fact. It is definitely true. It's harder to be a bad game master in a new school game that follows this approach. But, in my opinion, it's also harder in such a game to be a really good game master. A really good game master sees what needs to happen, and whether the dice or the rules directly allow it or not, the game master makes it at least possible, if not makes it actually happen. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I mean by that. Don't take that too literally. Fiat is given. When you start as a game master with a new group, or when you start as a game master, period, and you've never done it before, you are given fiat. If you're in the old school game, you are given this privilege of saying whatever you want to happen and having it be the thing that happens. Fiat is given, but you still have to earn it. What does that mean? Well, it helps if you understand what's going on here. The primary duty of the game master is not to fight with or defeat the players. It is not to present fantastically difficult challenges to them. And it is also not to give them everything, to hand them magic items and give them wealth and allow them to become powerful just because they're the players. Neither one of these things is the game master's job. The game master's job is to make sure everyone's having a good time. Now, in part, this involves understanding your players, and this can be difficult, especially if you have new to you players that you're not familiar with their style or their preferences. They might not even be able to accurately tell you what they enjoy, so it can be really tricky to figure these things out. But I've discovered that you can usually tell when someone's having a good time. So this is an important measure of your job. Your job is to make sure everyone has a good time, everyone's enjoying themselves. If you give them everything, that's fun for a couple of minutes. But then they realize they're just getting stuff and they're not working for it. They're not doing anything to deserve it or to earn it. And by earn, that could mean steal. I mean, if your player is playing a thief, stealing things is what that character does. When the thief gets to steal something, the player feels success because the character has done what the character is designed to do. The character was created to do what the character wants to do. The same as when a fighter fights or a wizard casts spells or whatever. This is the thing that the character is designed to do, and the player would like usually to do it. Presenting challenges that makes these things difficult for any of a number of reasons, however that difficulty arises. Presenting challenges like that, that's an important job of the game master. You are, as a game master, you are meant to present challenges that challenge your players, and not just their characters. I'm reminded of a classic Star Trek The Next Generation episode. The one where Commander Data takes Commander LaForge with him into the holodeck where they portray the characters Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. And Data, as Holmes, already knows how all the mysteries work, and he proceeds to solve them one after another straight out of his memory. When Geordi challenges him on this and says, "What's the challenge in that? You haven't actually solved a mystery." Data admits he can't help knowing all these answers. And Geordi offers to create a scenario where Data will be challenged because he doesn't know the answers. And then Geordi makes a classic mistake that I have been known to comment on with people in many other situations. He says to the computer to create a scenario that would be challenging to Commander Data, rather than telling it to make a scenario that would be challenging to Sherlock Holmes. And the computer does exactly that. It creates a scenario that puts the entire starship in jeopardy, which is kind of what we expect from a holodeck episode of Next Generation. But this is the important part. As the game master, your job is to challenge Commander Data and not Sherlock Holmes. Your job is not just to challenge the player characters, you know, Grog the fighter and Lucas the wizard and whatever who happen to be involved in your adventure. Your job is not just to challenge them; it's to challenge the players sitting across the table or across the internet from you. And those challenges mean things like presenting them with opponents that they can't defeat, to teach them about running away or taking alternative forms of success. You don't necessarily have to kill the dragon. Sometimes you just need to steal from it, which is challenging enough. Or in some cases, literally escaping with your life is enough of a challenge. The players need to have experiences that make them feel like they're, succeeding, that they're keeping their characters alive. Yes, the player, the thief, wants to see the thief steal things. The player, the wizard, wants to see the wizard cast spells. This is the primary thing. This is the thing that they think they came to the table for. But you need to present them with challenges that are going to make them think, so that when they make them work at it, so that when they do succeed, they feel like they've succeeded. And if they fail, that instead of blaming you, they understand that it's their failure. And that sounds bad. That sounds harsh. It sounds like we're making people feel bad. It should energize them. The moment should drive them to perform better, to play better, and so forth. Fiat is not for building railroads. This is an important factor. It was a thing that I saw a lot around the late first edition, early second edition era years ago when I was playing the original role-playing games. Adventures would be written with a definite railroad. You have to go from this encounter to this encounter to this encounter, from this location to this one in order to keep up with the adventure, to succeed at it. And fiat was used, was prescribed to keep people on track. You were to twist the very universe to make sure the players got to the places they were supposed to get to. I don't like this. I remember one Dragonlance adventure, I never ran it, but I read through it, that at one point has the players facing an army, a literal army, and they are supposed to turn and run. Some players just won't do that. And the game, the adventure is written to specify that if the players refuse to run from the army and actually show signs of defeating any significant number of them, that the game master is to deploy additional units. Just keep having these enemies roll out of the woodwork and keep fighting to force the players to run away. I have seen players that would not work on. Sometimes people have to be taught some other way. But I don't like that. It's not right. It's not how you should run a game. I don't like railroads. And I've talked about that in another video, and I'll probably talk about it again in the future. I don't like railroads. The main thing about it is fiat is not meant to be used to build railroads. It is meant to be used to make sure the players are having a good time. Okay. Situations where you should apply fiat. Number one is that divisive issue of fudging. Do you ever fudge as a game master? Don't answer that question. I don't care, because you probably should. Let's say that you have an adventure where, to advance to the next stage, the players have to find a secret door. They might not succeed at that. And yes, I've seen adventures, I have seen published adventures, where advancing to the next part of an adventure requires finding a secret door. You need to fudge here. It depends a little bit on how your players approach the secret door. First of all, if they don't even know it's there, you're going to have to guide them. Drop a clue, a footprint. That's enough. Half a footprint that goes into the wall, that's classic. You've seen that on movies already. It's a classic way to give away the presence of a secret door. My players in my games are always looking with the footprints in a dungeon room to see if there's any markings on the floor that they can follow. And it doesn't make sense that they're all perfectly clean. So you think about that. That is an important factor. I used a dropped pair of spectacles in one dungeon as a way to signal a secret door. The best part of it is because I wasn't prepared for them to go through that secret door immediately. I arranged matters so that the glasses weren't dropped outside the secret door until they needed to be able to find it. And that was a clue that this is where they needed to search. But even when they know where to search, even when they start searching in the right place, they might not roll well enough. The chance to find a secret door just isn't that high. So, let's say, for the moment, that we have a secret door that player characters have to get through, and they have some idea where it is, and they're searching for it. If the players tell you they're searching one at a time, while other people watch the exit or whatever, you might take the opportunity to point out that that's going to take several turns. Always remember in games like Basic Fantasy or Iron Falcon and other games of the type that such activities are normally assumed to take a turn or 10 minutes. If they do it sequentially, one after another, if 3 characters search, there's a half an hour. And in many dungeons, you've rolled 1 or 2 encounter checks by that point. Remind them of that. But if they want to do it that way, fine. You need to pay attention also to the possibility that if they do 2 or 3 like that, that they'll give up. I might consider, with the second person searching, just to say that they found the secret door. If they're in the right area. Roll the dice where they can't see them, which you should do anyway. Because if they can see the die, that gives away to them whether they failed the die roll or whether there's literally not a secret door there, and they'll move on if they're in the wrong place. You should never show that die roll anyway. Roll the die, look at it, ignore the number, and tell the second guy that he found the secret door, second character, second player, that he found the secret door. If several player characters say they're all going to search an area at the same time, we're all going to search this area for secret doors, roll for each of them, and whoever got the closest to success, if no one succeeded, whoever got the closest to success, just announce, hey, Bork found it. Right there is a secret door in that space. And move on. Situations like this, you have to be prepared to allow for fudging. You have to be prepared for this, or your adventure is going to grind to a halt. There are less significant situations where the game becomes bogged down in something that's maybe not quite as critical to the success, but it's a distraction. It's slowing the game down, and nobody's really having fun while they're doing whatever they're doing. It's time to fudge. It's time to let them have the thing, or alternately, as Chandler says, if you don't know what to do in a scene, have a man walk through the door with a gun. Well, in this case, it means if the game is bogged down in the middle of something that's not working, roll a random encounter. Don't roll to see if there's a random encounter. There is a random encounter. You need that. You need to move the game along. Roll for a random encounter. And I'm back. I'm sorry. Duty calls. So at any rate, I was talking about creating an encounter to move the game along. You may want to nerf the encounter. 2 or 3 hobgoblins walking through the door, lizard men maybe, will be enough to move the game along and get people, doing something else besides whatever they're arguing about or dinking with, and get things going. The important part here is you use your fiat to make the game interesting, to make the game fun. If you want an encounter, you have an encounter. But you should not want an encounter because you want to beat your players up. You want an encounter to happen to be interesting, to be exciting. This is also why, as important as I think it is to fudge when you need to, I think it's important to use the dice. Use the dice for things. Use the dice to decide situations, to decide what happens. Use reaction rolls to figure out if the monsters absolutely hate the player characters, or maybe for some reason they like them. Not all monsters are going to like player characters. Some monsters just want to eat them. But there are monsters that could take a weird, perverse liking to a player character and help them out instead of trying to kill them. Use reaction rolls. Use other methods. Use the dice for this. Use the dice to decide random encounters most of the time. Otherwise, your biases, your preferences will start to show, and the players will begin to recognize them. I've talked about this in other videos and on my blog before. It's easy to fall into the trap of being predictable when you don't use the dice, or when you just say you don't want to. Fudge when you need to make the game interesting, but use the dice to make the game interesting. Making the game interesting, exciting, unpredictable is important. Dice are tools for this, but they don't rule you. Now, when should you fudge? The primary reason for fudging is to keep the player characters alive. Don't fall into the trap of fudging to save one player character. If they get themselves killed, they get themselves killed. You can, if you feel like it, maybe nerf a damage roll here or there. Have, options to keep them alive if that happens. If you roll all your dice in front of your players, you're going to have to deal with the fact that you're not going to be able to avoid killing them accidentally. It happens. So you have to decide how you're going to approach this. If you accidentally kill the entire party, if they're not actually all killed, if some of them are technically bleeding out, if you use the -10 death rule from Basic Fantasy, for example, or something similar in your game, some of the characters are still technically alive, but the monsters have won. If the monsters are intelligent, they can take prisoners, bind the characters' wounds, tie them up, and haul them off. Or maybe they are planning on roasting them later, but keeping them alive keeps the meat fresh. So this is something that you can do to keep the characters alive, but you have to be prepared to give them some way to get themselves out too. And that's especially tricky if they did all get knocked below 0 hit points, because now they're really not able to fight. So you've got to think about what you're doing here. And this is where your fiat comes in. The goblins defeated the entire party. Most of the party is still technically alive. The goblins bind their wounds and drag them off and throw them in dungeon cells. And say across the way is a NPC in a cell, and he or she or they, if there's a group of them, are not at negative hit points, but they're not able to get out for whatever reason. They just need something that one of the player characters has on them. Now, obviously, the monsters disarmed the player characters, but that doesn't mean that they took all their stuff. Maybe somebody's got something in their belt pouch or hanging off their belt, or maybe they even still have their backpack. Although I would think the goblins would take that so they could loot it. But work something out like that. Thinking on your feet is an important talent for the game master. You're not going to get it right every time. But when you do, it's wonderful. When you think of a way to get your player characters out of it, absolutely you want them inconvenienced. The goblins took their weapons, including their magic weapons. The goblins took their backpacks and got all their loot. Player characters are now, even if they escape from the dungeon, they're armed with makeshift or stolen weapons. They're penniless, and they have to deal with that situation. So, these are things that you can do to keep the game interesting, to make events happen. The players will talk about for years to come. So, fudging is fiat, and it's within your rights to do it. The most important part when applying fiat is to be confident and smooth. Be smooth when fudging. Be smooth when using fiat. Be smooth when making things work. Try to make your players think that that's exactly what you expected to happen. That everything is right on track, even though we're not building a railroad. it doesn't hurt to let your players think that you're smarter than you are when it happens. It also doesn't hurt to let your players know that you're not really any smarter than they are. If a player character points out something that you've got wrong, do not use fiat as a club to beat them with. If you're wrong, own it. If whatever you were wrong on was long enough ago and a bunch of events have happened since then that you can't go back and fix it, find some way to work it into the story. If a spell didn't do what it should have done and the player proves to you that you should have allowed it, but it's 3 scenes later, you can't go back and change that. So you have to think about what could have happened to have affected the spell to prevent it from working. Did the monster have some magic item that gave him resistance to it, for example? When you figure out what you're going to do, you've created a new part of the story. Which means when a player proves you wrong about something, one strategy you can use is to say, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? And do the same thing when the players think they figured out something you got wrong that you did get right because of situations in the adventure they don't know about. It doesn't matter if the situation in the adventure that they don't know about was there before they looked or whether you created it on the fly because you had to. Make both situations look the same to the players. And they will develop a real respect for your ability to write adventures or to run them. They'll think that you're a genius. And if you do it right, maybe you are. Because thinking on your feet like that is not easy. This is your job as a game master. Make the game interesting. If you do get something wrong and you can't fix it on the fly, you have to own it. You have to admit to the players, look, man, I made a mistake. And, maybe there's nothing you can do to fix it. Maybe there's something that you can do to fix it. Maybe the smartest thing to do is just to take the hit and say, I'm sorry I messed this up. I don't think I can fix it. Ask the players, do you want to go back? Do you think we can go back? Can we get our characters and our situation back to the scene and run it again? If it just happened, do a redo. Give them a retry. Do it again, but do it right. Start from wherever you went off the rails and fix it. When your players understand that you care about making things right for them, when they understand that, they will have more respect for you as a game master. Not less because you made a mistake, more because you were willing to fix it. And then just as, fixing things on the fly when you have to will give you more respect. The more respect you get, the more you earn the right to the fiat that you've already been given. The more you prove yourself worthy. And the more you become worthy. It's not just a matter of proving you're worthy. It's not just a matter of proving it in court. It's a matter of actually being that way, actually deserving that position. I'm not sure any of us actually do. I'm not sure I do. But yet, let's call that another form of suspension of disbelief. You need to be able to get to a place where your players instinctively accept that you're maybe not infallible, but that you are right enough of the time that they can assume you're always right. You want to get to the point where the players innately believe that you are always, if not right, always on the right side, always on the correct side, always being fair. Always being fair. Fair doesn't mean every fight can be won. Fair doesn't mean everyone gets the same stuff. Fair means that you take inequities that you've created or perpetuated seriously and fix them. Deal with that. Everyone doesn't have equal success, but everybody should have opportunity. Maybe not exactly equal opportunity, because that would be hard to prove. When the wizard wants to cast spells and the fighter wants to fight, sometimes those are going to align and sometimes they're not. So you can't just be equal, but you have to be equitable. You have to be fair. You have to, I think fair really is the best word for it. Fair to your players, fair to yourself, fair to your game, and keep your goal in mind. you're making the game interesting. I think I've covered everything. I think that's it. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.